Here's why I think MLK's strategy for civil rights was the best. My thesis statement was that King's peaceful nonviolent protest strategy was the best in terms of trying to deliver a message to moderate white America so they can pressure the government to make social change. Some evidence of this is the Montgomery bus boycott. This went on from December 5th, 1955 to December 20th, 1956, and it began with African American Rosa Parks getting arrested after refusing to give up her seat, in which then Dr. King proposed a boycott the day after, which was effective and caused a huge deficit in the transportation's business. Montgomery's black residents were not the only boycotters, as even the paying customers, who were white also, were boycotting the public transportation. In June of 1956, a federal court found laws in Alabama and Montgomery requiring segregated buses to be unconstitutional. An appeal, however, kept that segregation intact until December 1956, when the U.S. Supreme Court ended the segregation by upholding the district's court rule, which ended the boycott and started paving the way for the civil rights movement first victory and many more to come. Another example of this is the Birmingham Campaign, which began April 2nd, 1963 and ended May 10th, 1963. It started with boycotting led by Shuttlesworth, which was meant to pressure business owners to employ other races in their work. The campaign received very little media coverage, in which Dr. King was also issued a warning, and for violating that warning, he would have been arrested, in which he did go along and violated the injunction and was then thrown in the Birmingham jail. After being arrested and tossed in jail, King later wrote the infamous Birmingham jail letter. It was not until after King had been released had another event taken place, in which this event was young black schoolchildren who were marching down the street had Commissioner Eugene Bull order officers to use excessive force against them, such as high-pressured fire hoses, police dogs, and baton beatings. This event had media coverage from all over America and also sparked outrage all over America, and which helped convince President Kennedy to send Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights Burke Marshall to Alabama to help negotiate for the protests to stop and for peace to happen. It was then on May 10th an agreement was reached and all whites and blacks only signs were removed by Birmingham officials. My final example is the Washington March, which started and ended on the same day, August 28th, 1963. The march had more than 250 participants, which is more than what any other civil rights movement had seen. During this movement is where the infamous I Have a Dream speech was said. It was also said to have lasted only 4 minutes, but instead went around 16. There was many prominent civil rights leaders there, such as Randolph, leader of the Brotherhood of the Sleeping Car, Porter Wilkins, executive secretary of the NAACP, John Farmer, and much more. The march proved to be successful, as had pressured John F. Kennedy to sign a civil rights bill in Congress. The famous I Have a Dream speech's meaning was that those of African American heritage are long overdue for a promise that was made to them almost 150 years prior. And now that we're done going off of the examples of Dr. King's strategy, here are some comparisons to him and the other prominent civil rights leaders. Starting off, Dr. King, he wanted to be as peaceful as possible during protest, meaning absolutely no violence, not even retaliating against violent policemen. He wanted both races to work together and live equally together as well, which made him an integrationist. And he believed nonviolent tactics were key to ending racial segregation and violence. Now, Malcolm X and Dr. King were alike in the sense of speeches, protests, whatnot. But the only difference between them was violence, as Malcolm X was more of a by any means necessary, political renegade, meaning he would go to any violent means he can to ensure that the civil rights movement moves forward. He was a firm believer in black supremacy, which, if you know what white supremacy is, it's pretty much that. And he advocated for black militancy as self-defense against white aggression. So think about protests where the policemen were attacking. His protests would have been more or less actually retaliating against that and defending themselves. And here's Thurgood Marshall. Thurgood Marshall built the legal foundation for MLK's challenges on segregation. So without him, MLK wouldn't have much of a chance, or at least his chances would be smaller in his fight for civil rights. He also took the fights for civil rights to the courts and was opposed to civil disobedience, which is what King and Malcolm X were doing. Now, going along on my thesis and Dr. King's strategy, his character bio that I had, Dr. King managed to persuade moderate white America by doing peaceful protests. Now, he believed that being peaceful not only would end the violence of segregation, but would actually make, because at the time, many, well, white people had assumed that black people were savages, they weren't as intelligent as whites. And so showing the sign of peacefulness in that they can be calm and resilient would show that black people are just the same as white people. And his speeches as well, I wouldn't consider the Birmingham jail letter to be a speech, but in a sense, it was using words to move a certain crowd of people. Along with the Washington March, I Have a Dream speech. That speech is the most prominent to civil rights history at all and is well known amongst everyone. Another one is Taking Risks. During the Birmingham incident, when King was issued that warning, he couldn't decide whether he wanted to be on the front lines or if he wanted to be watching from afar. He didn't want to tarnish his reputation, so he took the off chance and took the risk of being arrested, in which, he was arrested. And that is why I think Dr. King's approach to fight for civil rights was the best strategy compared to Malcolm X and Thurgood Marshall.